qui est comédienne du film.
Who is an actress in the film.
Lucie Laruelle.
Lucie Laruelle.
Jean Pierre Dardenne.
Jean Pierre Dardenne.
Luc Dardenne.
Luc Dardenne.
Babette
Verbeek.
Samia
Hilmi.
Elsa Huben.
And Elsa Huben.
Qui sont aussi donc les comédiennes du film.
Actresses in the film. I'd also like to welcome the crew members we have at the front row. The producer, Delphine Thompson, Film du Fleuve.
Le producteur
The producer, Denis Fred.
85. Et j'ai une question pour vous.
And I have a question for you.
Voilà, je trouve que votre cinéma
I think
toujours une notion,
that your films always focus on the need for someone else, something you said yourselves. You always need someone else, but the characters don't necessarily know it. In this film, there's a double need for someone else. You have these young women who are actually teenagers and who need their baby, and their babies, without realizing it, because their babies also need their mother. I'd like to know what attracted you to this topic today, this topic of very young mothers. I think that there was a first script with a character who was a young girl who lived in a young mother's home. We didn't know what a young mother's home was really like, so we went to see one, and we saw a group of young mothers, an educator, a psychologist, a director. It was a whole environment. These young mothers feel very alone. They've encountered difficulties, misfortune, they've given up a lot of things, but there's a lot of life, a lot of assistance amongst mutual assistance among these girls. And just to answer your question, I think that what made us interested in the relationship between a young mother, the child, the young mother, and that young mother's mother hinges on the fact that I think this is what we said to each other in any event. How can I put this? We didn't explicitly say we'll make the film for that reason, but that is something which gradually grew on us. But it was about 2.5 or 3 years ago when we looked at the world, violence, populism, the person who's right is always the strong man, this logic which seems to be spreading around the world. Well, we thought, here we have a haven of peace. Here's a place where there's a lot of mutual assistance, gentleness, responsibility for others, help to enable people to cope. That's what really motivated us. Also, the fact, how can I put this? We were really captivated by these babies. In the film, we wanted them to be very present. It is very present in the film. Let's take a first question right away. A question in English. Could you please put on your headsets?
Hi, question here from Brazil, Rodrigo Fonseca. Congratulations for this amazing tale of hope. It's a technical question. I was amazed by the sound engineer of the film. I would like to hear a little bit about how you design sound and how much of your previous documentary background influence on the sound design of a film like that.
First of all, as you probably noticed, for the past few films, there's rarely any music. It's not a value judgment in terms of music. Rather, up until now, we didn't think music had much of a part to play, except from the odd occasion in the film. The sound track, well, we wanted our scenes to be paced, to be swept up in the pace, the rhythm of life, so to speak. All the sounds that you can't control, we try to see, in fact, how we can incorporate them in the screenplay. So some places where we shoot are chosen not because of the actual space where we're going to go about our work, but also because perhaps there is a very busy road next door, and you constantly have the noise of the cars and the buses. So that's part of our location scouting, because we choose places that are actually noisy. Also, increasingly, there's silence in our films. Silence between the lines, between the actors. As there's no music, we try, when we work on the editing, we try to ensure that it's the lines, the words, the silences, and the surrounding noise which play a part. Also the gestures of the actors. When they touch an object, we always try to ensure that these objects are very precise in terms of the sound, because they're part of the pace in the scene. The first scene, where Jessica, Babette Verbeek, meets her mother, you can hear the sound of the cars. It's a very loud sound, and there are trucks. And that was done on purpose. As Jean Pierre said earlier on, we chose the noisiest possible location because it was a very, very important scene. It was so very intimate. She was approaching this woman who was her mother, and she's already 17 to 18, but has never seen her mother before. So it's a very intimate moment set against this hugely loud noise. So that is a way of shouting out the message in the scene. Any other questions? Peter Paulhout, Interfilm from Germany. I have a question for the Darden Brothers. I'll put my question in French. I've spoken with a lot of my colleagues, and I saw that even the most hardened critic left the screening in tears. How do you explain this extraordinary fact? It's the famous Dardenne effect. We can't explain it. Perhaps one day we were all babies. We have another question.
Bonjour,
hello.
Je suis Lucas Chersa de Prague.
I come from Prague.
Télévision Noé. J'ai deux questions.
I have two questions, one for the Darden Brothers and one for the actresses. For the Darden Brothers, in the Film Français review, which was published 2 days ago, you say several times over that because of the babies on the set, you were aiming less at perfection. You said that perfection could even become a prison. Could you perhaps develop that idea and tell us where you view perfection in your films? When we did Rosetta and The Sun, for example, I'm not criticizing our previous films. However, we didn't want Rosetta, for example, or the spectator to see that Rosetta is going to turn round. The camera slows down when she's walking, follows her. We didn't want the camera to go past Rosetta. The camera continues to move on while Rosetta is turning around. And so you don't see her face again, and then you just follow her a bit. That was carefully planned, and it takes a lot of time. We shot this scene time and again. And with the babies, thanks to the babies this time around, they made everyone feel they were in a really good mood, and we were very happy to shoot with babies. Babies don't know that they're being filmed. So babies just do their thing. So we said to ourselves that we would try to have a take, just one take, and be content with it. Sometimes we had to do 2 takes. I must admit that the takes weren't the same thanks to the babies, which gave a different pace to the film. The actresses had been coached. They weren't young mothers in their normal lives. They learned how to hold the child, put the child down. And we had to take account of the babies, which is a sort of a documentary dimension in this fiction film. So depending on what the baby did, you have this sequence with Ariane and with Babette. Well, sometimes the babies cry, and it takes a while for the character to calm the baby down and to actually ask her a question. And that springs from the fact that she had a baby in her arms. For us, it was wonderful. We thought, this is great. We have a fantastic take. The actresses also were very important. I'm not saying that everything hinged on the babies, of course. Thanks to these babies, the scenes really sprang to life, and that enabled us to go much faster. We shot the film in 38 days. It usually takes us about 50. A question that's hardly surprising. What was it like to be in this film and be directed by the Darden Brothers? And how did you submit your offer to be in the film? Who'd like to start? I don't know, everyone seems to be looking at me, the older sister. Because of their reputation, we were a little bit apprehensive, in fact, because they are so extremely well known. However, they made us feel so much at ease right from the very beginning that the stress disappeared. For me, personally speaking, I love how careful they are to attend to the most minor detail. And what about your character? How did you view your character? What struck you most in this character? Well, what struck me most, really, during the filming, I loved the relationship with the babies. That evoked in me a sort of maternal instinct, whereas under normal circumstances, I don't really like children that much, or babies. And what about your character, too, Samia? How did you view your character, and what did you discover through this character? I think that family ties are very important for my character. It's very important for her to establish this link with her baby and recreate this link with her mother. That's important for me, and I learned so much through this part. I learned to be very positive. There's a lot of love around your character. Babette, things are tougher for you right from the outset in the film, in any event. What struck you? What did you see in this character? I grew very attached to my character, in fact. I immediately felt great respect. Her needs, the desire to create this strong link with her baby, that moved me a lot. In fact, I needed to feel this empathy with the character in order to embody this person. As to your latter question, I was a bit stressed as well, working with the Darden Brothers. Wow, but they made me feel very much at ease, as though I was in the right place. It was a wonderful experience to work with the whole crew, in fact. They're a real family. You sense they've been working together for a very long time. People know what they have to do. You feel that you're really warmly welcomed when you turn up on the set, and that's what enabled me to feel so at ease. Everyone was there to help and to be supportive. We were very fortunate. And what about you? Your character. Your character is full of energy, a kind of special energy. It's a beautiful character. How is it like working with the Darden Brothers? And how do you view your character? My character is very impulsive, but sensitive at the same time. You can be both, of course. She doesn't think much before she blurts something out, but then she regrets what she said. She's perhaps a little bit naive concerning her boyfriend, but it's really because she wants to create a family, and that in itself is very moving, but it's a bit naive because he doesn't. Working with the Darden Brothers, as the others three actresses have said, it was great. It was my first experience. They're always ready to listen to you. They show great empathy in our discussions. They want to make sure you feel at ease. They kept asking, do you feel happy with this scene? And when we had to shoot a scene again, they always explained why. There was a lot of communication, and that helped us feel very comfortable. It makes things very natural as well. And you, Janina, your character is very intense. Yes, my character moved me no end. I read the script, and I thought it was very interesting to talk about such a character. The mother of my character is very problematical. Ariane has a baby at a very early age, and I thought it was very important to talk about this family setup, which may be handed down from one generation to the next. So I was moved by the character. I had 2 or 3 other experiences in the cinema, but here it's the very first time I felt so close to the character I was going to embody. And yesterday, when I watched the film, the character is so strong, the film is so powerful, and I sensed that I was really living the scenes I was acting. I felt supported, well advised, there was so much empathy. In other films, there were only adults, but in this case, we were all young actors and actresses. It's true that all the characters are very powerful, and towards the middle of the film, you all come together, and it's a marvelous occurrence in the film. Question in English.
Good morning. Good morning, Monsieur Jean Pierre and Luc. I'm a little nervous because this is very personal for me. I love your work so much. And there's a question at the end of this, but I want to tell you, I was so moved by this because I was a teen mother. I was 16 and I got kicked out of college. I was in college, I got kicked out. It was a stigma, ugly stigma to be African American and pregnant at that time. This was in the 70s, so my son and daughter are very old now. And I thought I had put all of that behind me until I saw your movie, and I saw how young these girls were in the film, and I wondered, was I ever that young and ever... I'm going to get to my question, but I didn't know I was going to be so emotional. Excuse me. Your movies have so much goodness in them, so much empathy. To me, one of the most noble things cinema can do is make you feel something, put yourself in the shoes of someone else who is different than you, and allow you to understand them a little bit, and to bring people together. That's why I love your movies so much. And I want to know, where does that inherent goodness in every one of your movies, whether you're talking about Rosetta, Les Enfants, The Feast, so many of your movies, I see a kernel that you have a moral core, and there's an inherent goodness. Where does it come from? Does it come from your upbringing? Does it come from working with each other? What is it about you that make your movies like this? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And now in French. Je pense que,
I think,
sans vouloir m'embarquer dans des grands mots,
without using lofty words, I think as a filmmaker, as a human being as well, who is a filmmaker, we are filmmakers, we're truly, really, absolutely interested in our characters. We want our characters to be present as possible, and not
Ça va depuis les habits
picturesque,
jusqu'à la manière de s'exprimer.
ranging from their
déplacement,
manners, their friends, the way
leur
they
présence.
talk,
C'est ça
the
qui
way
nous
they
intéresse.
move.
C'est parce
They
que,
must be
si vous
very
voulez, a priori,
present,
on les
because
aime vraiment.
basically we truly
Et on aime
love
vraiment
our characters.
Ariane,
We love
on aime
Ariane.
vraiment Julie,
We truly
on
love
aime vraiment
Julie.
toutes.
We love them all.
Pour qu'elles puissent vraiment exister devant la caméra.
For them
Pour qu'elles soient
truly
vraiment
to
le
be
plus
able to
la plus
exist
présentes
before the
possible.
camera,
Et
to
tout
be
le
as
reste, toute la mise en
present
scène et
as
tout ça,
possible.
qu'est-ce qui fait qu'on
Because
fait
as
un
to
mouvement par
the remainder in the film, what accounts for a movement?
que les comédiens bougent dans un sens,
Why
pas dans
do
un sens?
characters move
C'est parce
this way or
qu'on
that? It's
essaie
because we
trouver
always try
la manière
to find
dont
the
ces
way
personnages
in
soient
which
les plus
these
présents
characters are
possible.
going
Et
to be
parfois, c'est
as
simplement
present
un
on the
plan
screen as
d'un
possible.
visage à l'arrêt pendant 30
Sometimes it's
secondes.
just
Et
a
on sent qu'après
take,
35 secondes,
a
c'est
close-up
ça.
for a couple of seconds.
C'est parce
That
que c'est vraiment ça
may
qui nous intéresse.
suffice.
C'est l'être
That's
humain.
what interests us,
Comment
the
filmer
human
plus
being.
simplement
How,
l'être humain
as
pour
simply
qu'il
as
puisse être plus
possible, can
présent
you
et
film
qu'il puisse,
human
comme vous
beings
dites,
so they're really
être en
present
dialogue
and
avec le spectateur et
say
la
something
spectatrice,
to you
et qu'il
as a
puisse émouvoir
spectator,
le spectateur et la spectatrice au
move
point
the spectator
que certaines
to the
spectatrices
extent
et
that some
certains
viewers,
spectateurs
some
sentent chez eux
members
des
of the
choses qui
audience
bougent, qui vibrent
sense
comme ça
things
avait été vibré
vibrate
avant.
within
Et c'est pas les mêmes
themselves.
qui sortent de la salle
And
que ceux qui
it's
sont entrés. On sort
not, they're not the
transformés.
same when they leave the room as when they entered it.
Nous avons une autre question.
Another question?
Bonjour,
Hello.
Conchita Casanova, de
Conchita
Radio Nacional de
Casanova,
España.
National Spanish Radio.
Félicitations
Congratulations
pour votre nouveau bébé.
on your new baby.
Pour moi, c'est un film magnifique.
For me, this
Jeunes
is
Mères,
a
c'est un film rond,
magnificent
un
film.
chant à la vie.
It is
qui m'a
a hymn to
touchée beaucoup. Et
life.
alors, la
I felt
demande, c'est,
deeply
il
moved.
faut
My
choisir
question,
la lumière.
you have to choose the
Il a
right
disparu
kind
maintenant.
of
Il y a un
light.
blackout ici à Cannes.
Here in Cannes, there's been a
Il faut
blackout,
choisir toujours
but you
encore la
always
lumière
have to
avant
choose the
de
right
l'obscurité.
light
C'est votre choix aussi
instead
dans
of
les
darkness.
films.
Is that
Merci.
your choice in the film, to show light rather than
Oui, c'est
darkness?
notre choix
Yes, of course, it is our
dans le
choice.
film, c'est-à-dire par
In
rapport
the
à
film,
chaque personnage,
You can see each character,
chaque jeune mère.
each
C'est que quand
very
on a
young mother.
commencé à écrire
When we started to
le
write
scénario,
the script,
on a opté pour une stratégie
we
qui est de
opted
raconter
for a
5
strategy which
histoires
consisted in
qu'on a
telling
écrites
5
avec
stories.
les étapes principales
We wrote
du
the
début à
main
la fin.
stages from the
On n'a pas
beginning
essayé
to
de
the
voir le
end.
film
We
dans
didn't
son
try
tout de suite.
to see
Pour
the
ne pas
film
justement trop
as
le
a final
construire. On s'est
entity
dit, on va
right
voir
at the
comment
beginning.
ces
We didn't want
histoires
to
se croisent.
overly build
Dans la
it. We
maison
wanted to see
maternelle,
how
ou
will
dehors.
these tales then become
Et au bout de
intertwined
chaque
as time goes by.
trajectoire, on s'est dit,
At the end of
ces jeunes
each
filles, ces jeunes
section,
femmes,
we said this young
ces jeunes
girl,
mères
this
sont
young
bien sûr
mother,
victimes de
of course,
conditions
is a
sociales, la
victim
pauvreté,
of
de
her social
l'absence, de
background,
manque d'affection.
poverty, the lack of affection,
Elle répète
absence
souvent,
of
comme l'a
affection,
dit, Janaïna,
repeated
ces
time and
schémas
again. As Janina
passés.
said, these
On fait la même chose que sa mère, que
patterns
sa
which are
grand-mère.
handed down from generation to
Donc, on s'est dit,
generation, from
comment
grandmother to mother, mother to
s'affranchir,
daughter.
comment peuvent-elles se libérer
So we thought,
après
how
ça?
can they
C'est ça que
free
chaque fois,
themselves
mais il
of
fallait
this
trouver une lumière qui ne soit
prison?
pas trop le
But we
happy
had to
end,
find the right light.
complet, si je
that
puis dire.
wouldn't
Il fallait
be too
une
bright.
lumière, quelque chose de
The
fragile,
light had
de
to
vacillant un peu, mais
depict
quand même lumineux.
things as fragile,
Avec,
yet there had to be some
on a
light.
essayé de
Things had to be
construire
luminous
jusqu'à
at the
la
same
fin où la
time.
musique,
So we built things
bon,
up
voilà, la
until
musique,
the end,
qu'elle
and
a
then you
demandé
have the
que
music.
Ariane, quand elle confie son enfant,
Ariane,
demande bon,
when
est-ce qu'il y a
she
la
hands
parole, la
over her
musique?
baby, she says, well,
Et,
where
puis
is
la
the
musique
music?
revient, et
And
c'est une
the
musique
music
qu'elle a
comes
entendue,
back in the
elle,
film, and it's
Julie, qui lui a
music,
permis de s'en
the
sortir,
music
parce qu'elle
Julie
voyait le
listens
visage de
to
cette
that
femme
enables her to
dans le
cope.
moment où elle était pas
Because you can
mal,
see
elle se
that
sentait
on
pas bien.
her face. There are times in the film
on a
where
essayé
she
de
was feeling
construire
really
quelque chose
bad.
qui
So we tried to build
aille, comme vous dites,
up
vers la
something
lumière,
in
vers
the
une espèce
film
d'apaisement
which
quand
tended
même,
towards
et
light.
enfin de découvrir la vie, pas
And
seulement survivre,
this
mais la vie.
rediscovery of life in a spirit of calm.
Bonjour.
Hello,
Bonjour, Sofiane de la RTBF.
Sofiane,
En tant
RTBF.
que Belge,
As a
il m'est
Belgian,
impossible de ne pas me
I
sentir
find it
fier
impossible
d'être dans
not
un
to feel
festival
proud
aussi
to
prestigieux
be
que
in
le
such a
Festival de Cannes,
prestigious
avec une
festival
magnitude
as
internationale,
Cannes,
de voir
which
les
has an
amateurs du
international
cinéma qui vous
reputation,
acclament.
and to see all
Vous
the
avez eu
cinema
un
buffs
très beau geste
who
d'aller rencontrer les
clap
fans avant la
when
montée
they
des
see
marches.
you.
Et c'est
You met
vraiment
with a
très
number of
touchant.
fans when going up the
Et,
red carpet. It
ce
was
qui
a very
revient, c'est
moving
aussi
scene.
l'émotion que vos films suscitent
Your
chez les gens.
films
Hier, sur les réseaux
create
sociaux, il y a eu des
huge
stories de
emotion
personnes qui pleurent, et
amongst
c'était
people.
très émouvant. Et là, on le
You
voit
could
aussi
see
avec,
endless people crying, like our colleague who asked the question here this morning. Your films have a huge impact on people. And what does the film do to you when you see it? Do you feel the same emotion as well? Yes, you've been talking about emotion. Our film focuses on emotion. When you see that people are swept away by your work, what kind of feeling do you have, or do you feel totally indifferent? Obviously, we're deeply moved. How can I answer? No, I'm not trying to be provocative. In other words, at a given point in time, your work is so broadly known, it's become a reference. So what do these reactions inspire in you? Do they make you want to create more and more films? The reactions encourage us to continue in the future, because we say to ourselves, wow, this film we've worked so hard on for 2 or 3 years, and we didn't work on the film alone. We had a whole crew, and the whole crew worked together with us. What we tried to tell through the script, during the filming and the editing, we're trying to say that, well, at a given point in time, the baby, the film, you have to let it go off and walk all by itself, like when it's screened here in Cannes. And you say, okay, the child is taking its first steps, and the spectators, well, we'll see how they react to the film. These emotions lead to questions. They're not sort of instant mechanical emotions that we've tried to elicit when making the film. And the reaction we got simply encourages us to continue our work and see what we'll do next. I believe that this film is not as dark as some of our preceding films. So perhaps next time round will be even less dark than in the past. The cinema is made up of emotions. That the film communicates with people, and there's something that happens between the screen, the characters, and the people watching the film in the room, and that's quite magnificent to see this link. It's just a parallel. It's a bit like a young mother's home. That's what we're trying to communicate. It's this gentleness we discovered. And the way in which we filmed things was designed to portray this gentleness.
Et puis, quand même, on a été, puisque nous sommes, je ne dirais pas tous là, mais
I'm not saying we are all here,
les comédiennes principales,
but we do have the main actresses. And we were overwhelmed to see the end result of this work. It's a bit of a wager. You say, okay, it's these people who are going to embody our characters, the actresses, and as of the first take, as of the first sequence, you see something happening before your very eyes, before the camera, and you try to be as simple as possible, as we were saying earlier on when filming. And you can achieve all this thanks to the presence of these young girls, these actresses, these young mothers. They're the ones you see on the screen. They're the ones you're watching. They're the ones who move you.
On a une autre question.
Another question?
Bonjour, Gérard Chargé de
Gérard Chargé, Cinézoom. I would like to congratulate you, together with all the other actresses in particular. Perhaps you should get a joint Best Actress award. That's my personal opinion, of course. I'd like to ask you a question about these young mothers' homes. In Europe, they do indeed exist. I didn't realize there were quite as many. You have a lot of characters in your film, and you have shown that there are a huge number of cases of young mothers in this situation. How do you explain this? Because there's so much preventive action that's been taken. How do you explain the fact there's so many young girls who have babies now? Perhaps the actresses would also like to express their views.
constaté en s'informant.
We noted,
des
we
différences
researched the
entre les
topic.
pays. En
There are
Roumanie, par
differences
exemple, il y a
between
beaucoup plus
countries.
de jeunes mères
There are many
qui ne sont pas
more
prises en charge
young mothers
Belgique
who are
ou en
not
France.
given a lot of
Donc,
care in the
comment
UK
se
compared with France or
fait-il que des
Belgium, for
jeunes mères
example.
se retrouvent
So
dans des
why
institutions
do
pour
you
autant qu'il y ait
find
des
these
institutions, parce
young
que
mothers
il y en a pas
in
partout, il y en a beaucoup. Dans
specialized
certains pays,
homes?
très peu.
In some countries, there are hardly any young
Ça,
mothers'
c'est une
homes
question
at
qui
all.
concerne, je dirais, l'éducation à la.
It's a question of
à la-
education.
Je dirais à la.
Why are there so many young mothers?
Au fait de prendre la pilule, au fait des moyens contraceptifs.
Young girls can take contraception, they can take the pill. It's a question of education.
L'éducation à la sexualité.
People have to be given education when it comes to sexuality. We talked with a Romanian journalist the other day who said, well, this kind of education doesn't exist in Romania. Nobody knows anything about contraception. What about abortion? Because, of course, in it's the family planning services that also have to advise about abortion. In many countries, that's the case. And the mother can decide to abort or not. However, these young mother homes are a wonderful thing for these young girls who, in their families, they often come from dysfunctional families, fragmented families. They had no affection, no love, they don't have any money. Sometimes they've dropped out of school. So in these young mothers' homes, they learn to become responsible for their baby, whether they keep the baby or decide to give it up for adoption. But they shoulder their responsibilities, and it's a means for them to become more independent. That's very important. You really need these young mothers home. That's their job, to make these young girls independent. These young girls stay there for about 18 months on the whole. So this work that's done is hugely important, and great public service is rendered. We're currently living in a period when the services afforded by the state are being called into question. We've already discussed the matter with the TVs, and we got messages from the young mothers' home where we shot the film, and they say, well, thank you for defending our work and for showing what we do. Because for young girls, for young mothers, they find a family. As you can see, it's a home, but there are individual relationships with each of the educators. They don't have an individual educator per girl, but there's this huge personal link that develops. And these young mothers are always carefully advised and given a lot of attention by one assistant in particular. So it's important to encourage the work that's being done. It's important for the government to continue to provide subsidies. Any further questions?
Oui, excusez-moi. Est-ce que vous avez, l'une d'entre vous, ou toutes, ce que vous sentez en tant que jeune femme sur ce travail de prévention?
What do you think about this work in the area of prevention as young girls? Have you heard about this kind of work? Do you think it's interesting? What do you feel?
On va commencer par
Mais moi, bien sûr, j'en avais déjà entendu parler.
Of course, I'd already heard about this kind of service.
Comme un film qui prévient, mais aussi qui milite
This film
pour les
is designed
femmes.
to prevent such circumstances for arising, but it's also quite militant. It defends these young mothers. It's moving to make a film that shows how difficult it is for these young girls who end up with a baby. Look at Ariane as a character. She ends up deciding to give the baby up for adoption. Okay, she fell pregnant, she had a baby, she has to decide what to do with it, and I was deeply touched, deeply moved to portray this character. I view this as a militant film rather than a film advocating prevention.
Alors moi, le film, je trouve aussi que c'est très important.
I also thought that it was very important to film this subject. It is a form of prevention because young girls are forewarned, and for those young girls who find themselves in this kind of a situation, well, my story ended well, and you can see that there's always hope. So the film may reassure these young mothers. Show them that they will be able to manage. That's also a very important theme.
Oui,
Yes, well,
c'est un peu compliqué parce que
it's
je
a
suis
bit
pas du tout
complicated.
renseignée et je peux vous donner
Non,
mon
c'est
avis.
votre ressenti. Parce que,
Mais,
What was your feeling?
Je peux vous dire que oui, j'ai entendu parler de prévention,
Yes,
mais
I've heard about
c'est
prevention,
pas très intéressant. Je suis pas du tout
but I didn't really
représentative.
know much about
c'est pas
it.
une question, c'est pas quelque chose qui
It's
s'est
not
présenté à
something
vous, c'est ça?
that really struck
Oui,
you.
mais je pense surtout
Well, I
que
think
l'important de ce
above
film, c'est
all,
qu'en fait,
that what's important in the
prévention ou
film
pas, ou envie de le
is, well,
garder,
prevention or not, you
finalement,
want
ces
to keep
bébés,
the
ils sont
baby
là.
or not, well, the
Et
babies
qu'est-ce
are
qu'on en fait?
there. What are you going to do with them?
Je trouve ça hyper important aussi
And
de
I think
visibiliser
that's
ce travail de ces
extremely
éducatrices, de ces
important.
psychologues.
The work done by the psychologists,
que le
the
film raconte pour
educators
ça
is of paramount
aussi.
importance, and that's what the film
C'est
talks
le parcours
about.
de femmes,
You're quite right.
quand même, il y a beaucoup de femmes dans ce film, il y a beaucoup
There are a lot of
d'entraide.
women in this film. There's a lot of mutual
Non, mais
assistance,
c'est une très belle réponse.
mutual
Merci
support.
beaucoup.
Yes, that's a beautiful answer. Thank you very much.
Je pense aussi que le travail de prévention est très
I think
important dans le
that
cadre de ce
prevention
film.
is extremely
Et comme Janaïna
important,
l'a
as
dit,
portrayed
il y
in
a
the
surtout un
film.
côté
And as my
militant,
colleague just
que ce soit
said,
du
there is a
côté du respect
militant
des droits de
side
ces
to
jeunes femmes,
things.
mais aussi
You have to
du
respect these
travail
young girls'
des infirmières,
rights.
des
The work
psychologues,
done by
de
the
toutes les personnes
nurses,
qui
the
travaillent là-dedans.
psychologists
J'ai connu
is very
plus
important.
jeune des personnes
When I
qui
was
étaient
younger,
jeunes mamans,
I met some
et
very
j'avoue que je
young
m'étais pas vraiment intéressée
mothers when I
à
was
leur
younger,
ressenti, je les voyais de
and
loin sans me poser plus de
I
questions.
wasn't that
Et
much
je pense que là,
interested
ça
in what
les met
they
vraiment en
felt.
lumière et c'est
I
important.
viewed them from a great distance, but I feel this film is very important because it focuses on them. And what about this
Je sais pas
older
si j'ai vraiment
sister?
quelque chose à dire sur
Well,
la
I don't know whether I
prévention.
can add too much about prevention.
Mais moi, au niveau familial, j'ai
From a
une
family
sœur qui
stance, I
a eu
have a sister
aussi un enfant jeune
who also
et
had
qui l'a
a
gardé avec
baby
son
when she
papa
was
et qui sont
very
très
young.
contents.
She kept the
Et donc,
baby.
enfin,
She and her partner are
Voilà, moi,
very happy.
je l'ai de très proche et je trouve ça
So
totalement
I've
normal. Quoi.
experienced this very close at hand, and I felt it was very natural.
On a d'autres questions.
Any other questions?
Je voulais demander
I wanted to ask the following question.
la différence. Il y a beaucoup de reportages sociaux
We've
sur le
heard
sujet
a
de
lot
jeunes mères.
of social
Comment
reports
vous
about
caractérisez,
young mothers.
votre approche
How would you
différente
describe
à
your
une,
approach?
de ces
Is it
reportages
quite different
sociaux?
from
C'est quoi
these
la
social
différence
reportages?
entre votre
What's the
film,
difference
votre
between your film, in
approche
other words,
cinématographique
your
et le
cinematographic
documentaire
approach,
normal, je
and
dirais.
that of just a normal reporter or journalist?
La réponse est un peu dans la question.
Well, I think
Ici,
the
c'est une
answer is
fiction.
in your question.
C'est une fiction.
A film
Et
is
la
a fiction.
c'est donner
And
des possibilités à
fiction
la réalité que la réalité ne donne pas.
Gives reality certain
Par
possibilities
exemple,
that
de
reality
décider
doesn't
que
actually
ces
contain.
5 jeunes
You
filles,
could
ces
decide
5
that
jeunes
these 5 young mothers,
font
for
un
example,
trajet, parfois avec des moments
follow
douloureux,
a given
mais au bout
path,
du
which
compte,
may be somewhat
elles vont s'en
painful,
sortir.
but in the
Ça, c'est une
end, they
décision de la
will
fiction.
manage. That's a decision we made because we're talking about a fiction film.
Et je pense
I
que
believe,
c'est ce que nous essayons de faire
and this is
dans
what
le
we try
film,
to portray in the
c'est que
film,
les gens que nous
I
filmons,
believe that the
si on
people
s'y
we
intéresse
film,
vraiment, comme je
if you're
répondais
really
tout à l'heure à madame,
interested in them, you take a
c'est
true interest in them,
que la fiction, en
you
tout
can
cas pour
show
nous,
that
permet
fiction for
à
us
ce que les jeunes filles que nous filmons,
enables the
même si
young
on sait bien que
girls
ce sont
we're
des personnages
filming,
de fiction,
even if we know they're fictional
nous faisons
characters,
tout
we do
pour
our
qu'on s'intéresse
utmost to
à
ensure
l'individu, à
that we remain interested
celle-là
in the
et pas
individual,
celle-là,
this
que ce ne sont
person
pas
and
des
not
cas,
that.
que
They're
ce sont
not
des
just
êtres humains
cases,
uniques.
they are unique human
La fiction
beings,
permet
each
ça.
of them.
Et
And that's
on
something
n'est pas
fiction
dans les
makes
chiffres, on n'est pas
possible.
dans les
We're not talking
statistiques,
about figures, we're
on
not
est
talking about
pas dans les
statistics,
cas.
we're not talking about
Parce que souvent au
cases.
cinéma, vous voyez les personnages,
In the cinema,
la
you
manière dont
often
ils parlent, la
see
manière dont ils
characters
sont
and the way
habillés.
they talk,
Vous
the
vous dites,
way
ça
they
va,
are
j'ai
dressed.
compris.
You say, okay, I've
Voilà, il
understood.
correspond déjà à l'image que la réalité me donne
clicked,
de ce personnage. Nous, on essaie d'éviter
the
ça.
image
Et nous,
corresponds
pour nous,
to a
la
given
fiction, ça nous
reality.
permet ça.
That's not how we go about
C'est-à-dire
things. A
d'avoir
fiction film
vraiment
makes all this
affaire à des
possible.
individus,
You
pas à des
can
cas. Des
see that we're
individus
dealing with
uniques.
real individuals, unique individuals, and not
Vous
just
direz que parfois le
cases.
documentaire le fait aussi.
Of course, sometimes documentaries do that too.
Nous avons une autre question.
Another question?
Bonjour. Je me permets de vous poser
I
une
would
question
like to ask
plus théorétique, peut-être
a
philosophique.
fairly
Vous
theoretical
avez
and
déjà
philosophical
mentionné le
question,
sujet,
but you
c'est le
touched on the
fait
topic
que
already.
le film, en regardant le
Your
tout
film,
de votre œuvre,
when you look
devient
at your
moins
body
sombre,
of work,
plus léger, il y a plus
your
d'espérance,
films
aussi plus de
portray
soleil.
more hope.
Avant, il y
They
avait la
are
pluie,
lighter,
maintenant, il y a du soleil.
sunnier. There used to be
Donc,
rain in your films, now
est-ce
there's
que
more
vous,
sun.
pouvez
Could you
approfondir un petit
perhaps
peu vos pensées
go deeper
pourquoi,
into your thoughts on this matter?
c'est comme ça que votre carrière,
Why
que vos films sont plus ensoleillés, il y a
are
plus
your
d'espérance.
films now full
20
of
ans,
more
25 ans.
sun? Why is there more
Réchauffement
hope than
climatique.
some years ago?
Il y a plus de soleil.
There's global warming. perhaps there's more sun. That's one of the positive consequences of global warming, perhaps. No, what I really want to say is the following. We made a film where we wanted to save our characters. For example, in Lolita, we wanted to know what would become of these characters. There are people who work on cannabis plantations, and we wanted to show that there could be a happy ending. But we weren't very successful as filmmakers. We said to ourselves, well, as the kid with a bike, we said to ourselves, with this film, the girls must cope, must manage. We didn't want to turn the film into a documentary. Of course, we're all familiar with the cases where the girls don't manage, they fail. At the outset, what we wanted to do was to film these very fundamental emotions that link a mother to child, father to child, an educator to a young girl. This very supportive atmosphere is what we wanted to film. And if you provide mutual support, it's because you want everyone to succeed. As you said at the beginning, we want to show this need for other people. We show this from beginning to end of the film. But in some of my previous films, the characters didn't manage. They were killed beforehand. In this case, each of the girls resist, they manage, they learn to cope. And that's what's most difficult to depict, for example. Look at Ariane's case. Look at the character. The mother in fact, says, well, I'm going to give up my child to a family that has more money, that can give the baby a better upbringing. I have no money. And the case was similar with the mother, even though the mother wanted to keep the child for herself. So in the film, you can see that she wanted to keep the baby. She wants to create a new life for herself and the baby, start all over again. So truly, we wanted to tell 5 stories about young girls who resist. They manage. They do succeed. That's a very interesting point. It makes me think about Rosetta. For example, look at the inner voice of these young girls who's saying, well, you're going to cope, you're going to manage, unlike Rosetta. Sorry, you wanted to take the floor. It's a bit linked to what Luc was saying. The film clearly shows that whether you decide to keep your baby or not, the decision is right and matches what the mother really wants to achieve in life. Ariane is typical of what I've just said. It's fine to decide you want to give up your child for adoption. Last question. I wanted to congratulate you on one point. The film, at first glance, calls on us to look around ourselves, to look at this subject, which could appear to be totally disconnected from the world today. At the very beginning, people are blind, so to speak, but at the end, it's quite the opposite. The film is saying, open your eyes. Could you talk about this political dimension behind the film? I think Luc said this earlier on. When all is said and done, what are we doing? We're filming. We're filming mutual solidarity, mutual assistance in a place that's called a young mother's home, where everyone takes care of the others, and they try to make the most of this fragility that is part and parcel of life. And we focus on these young mothers, their babies, and the people who assist them at a given point in time when, in the world, in many places around the world, the law of the most powerful prevails. Violence predominates. The only human relationship we're proposing is survival, so to speak. But in the world today, people say, well, eliminate those who are preventing you from doing what you want. And if you eliminate them, it's their fault because they are the weakest.
Et nous, on s'intéresse aux faibles.
but we take an interest
Et
in
on
the
s'intéresse
weak.
à un des trucs les
We
plus faibles,
take
les
an
plus faibles, les plus
interest
fragiles.
in
C'est ce
those
premier
who are
rapport
weak
entre
and
deux êtres humains,
fragile,
entre une mère
this
et son
initial
enfant, son
relationship
bébé. Et
between
comment
two people,
on
a
fait
baby
autour
and
d'elle
the mother.
en sorte que ce
And we
lien
wanted to
se
show
tisse et
in
que
the
des
film
décisions
that
soient
this
prises et qu'elles
link,
arrivent à
this
dire je.
bond
Voilà. Dans ce
grows
tohu-bohu
over time.
général, on essaie de
In the
s'intéresser à
general
la
chaos
fragilité de
of
la vie.
today's world, we look at the
Et comme
fragility
l'a
of
dit aussi
life.
Jean-Pierre tout à
And
l'heure,
as Jean-Pierre
c'est
said earlier on,
c'est le regard qu'on porte, c'est ça. Parce que
it's
vous avez parlé de
all a
politique,
question of
et
how
au
you
cinéma
look at things. You
politique,
talked about
on s'en fout de
politics,
ça.
a
C'est comment on
politically
filme
engaged cinema. What really
une
counts
actrice,
is how
un
you
acteur,
film an
un bébé.
actress, an
Comment on
actor,
le filme?
a
Comment
baby.
est-ce qu'on fait
How do you film
qu'il
that
parvient à
person?
devenir un individu?
How do you
Regarder
ensure
un
that the
individu, c'est le
film is
contraire de
saying,
la force.
look
La
at this
force ne veut
individual.
pas des
The
individus,
individual
elle veut de la
is
masse.
the opposite of force. Force is a question
c'est
of
comme
the
ça que
masses.
on rend
And that's,
on rend
in
sensible
fact,
à une personne.
how we make people aware of
au
a
destin d'une
single
personne,
person, the
ici de 5
destiny, the
personnes.
fate of a person, and in this
Ça,
case, 5 people.
C'est la manière dont nous on
This
comprend
is
le
the way
cinéma,
in
comment on
which
le
we
voit.
view the cinema.
Sauver l'individu.
That's the way we
Qu'il
understand
disparaisse
the
pas, parce qu'il
cinema
est
as a
en train
way
de
of saving the individual, so the individual doesn't disappear. That was a wonderful conclusion, which brings us to the end of this press conference. Thank you very much for this magnificent film. Truly magnificent. This is an essential film. Thank you very much.